Welcome everyone to, I believe this is the fourth of our Retrofit presentations today. My name's Pither. I'm Technical Director at the Retrofit Academy, and it's fallen to me to chair this session, which is on Retrofit Design. We have four experts who are going to take it in turns to present their perspective on this topic in turn, and then we're going to give them about 10 minutes each, and then that should leave us 20 minutes for questions and answers and an open discussion. So I'll let them introduce themselves in turn. So let me ask Marion to come and kick us off.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. So I'm Marion Baeli. I'm an architect in a practice called PDP London. And I specialize in retrofit and low energy design. So I'm going to introduce the sort of session here. So all my slides are about the context of the UK residential housing stock. So first I wanted to kind of inspire people, and I know inspiring people with a graph is perhaps not so straightforward, but bear with me. This is a graph that's about market penetration of home energy efficiency measures, which means that all the little black dots in that graph are the progression of retrofitting of gas boilers in UK housing stock. So in 40 years, we've fitted gas boilers and radiators in pretty much all the UK housing stock, which also means that we dug out all the roads in the UK to bring gas, fossil fuel to your front door. So this is a major infrastructure work, absolutely phenomenal. So we are able of great change when we want to. This is what this really says. Is, if you said to somebody today, we're going to bring a new energy, but it means digging all the roads in the UK to bring this energy to your front door, you'd probably say this is crazy. But this is what's happened. We need to do a change on that sort of magnitude. So we have to, dismantle all these gas boilers and introduce a zero fossil fuel energy into our homes to be able to keep comfortable. And we have 30 years at most to do this. So I hope that's kind of giving you a bit of energy from, the past. So the UK context is 27 million dwellings, 18 million are owner-occupiers, 4.5 million are private renters, and 4.5 million are social rented. 60% of all homes are older than 80 years, so this is really a UK specific. 21% of the stock is Victorian, which is the least efficient of the stock as well. And 86% still use gas fossil fuel. So what this shows us that in recent years, the Housing Association have been really pioneering this retrofit move and have really embraced quite significantly. Private renters, not so much, and owner-occupiers, a little bit, but not very much. But what this shows is that all of our gas boilers in this room here is really part of the solution, I would say, rather than problem. But this is the big issue, is all of us. We all have a role to play in the decarbonization of our space heating in the UK. So that's it, no pressure, but we can all do something. This graph is extracted from the Letty retrofit guide, which illustrates per sort of character, whether it's a flat, a mid-terrace, a semi-detached, detached, or bungalow, the energy efficiency of the dwellings of the UK. On average, at the moment, the performance is roughly 130 kilowatt hour per meter square. We need to reduce this down to 50. This is the grade shift that we need to do. If you just want to keep an average figure, this is a sort of shift that we need to do as a country. At the moment, so we have about 150, 130 kilowatt hour per meter square per year, and it's all fossil fuel mostly. So we need to end gas now. This is another campaign launched by Edith, which is trying to kind of motivate people to no longer use fossil fuel. And we need to reduce this by down to 50 kilowatt hour per meter square per year using electricity. So that's why we speak about electrification of space heating. So this again is another illustration of the great shift that we need to do. Obviously, depending on the sort of form factor of your property, you're not going to have the same result if you insulate your property. The apartment being the easiest to reduce the energy demand from, and the bungalow being the hardest. So you just need to bear in mind once you go into the details of your own retrofit that you're not going to be able to have it as easy job if you have a bungalow than an apartment. This is again the key target set by the LETI guidance. So it's a guidance, it's not a standard, but it's really informative and well-written document that will help you to put some targets into your retrofit project. So for example, on energy use intensity, it has set the demand to 50 kilowatt hour per meter square per year, but also is relaxing it with an extra 10, so make it 60 when you have a constraint such as conservation area or spatial constraints, that sort of thing. There's other metrics which I don't have time to go into, but I would really urge you to have a look at the LETI retrofit guidance for these. The reason why you've heard me talk about electrification of space heating is because, as you can see in red here, most of the energy demand of the UK housing stock relates to the heating of the space. Lighting, hot water, fans and appliances is a lot less in the whole overall proportion of energy demand of a dwelling. So this is the red portion that we need to tackle, and we need to remove the fossil and reduce it to a minimum as possible. So the red now has become green, and is this shift to electrification of heat in a much reduced demand. This means that while before, in 19th century, we didn't have any insulated building, and we burned fossil fuel as well in our homes. In the 20th century, we turned to gas and kitted out all our homes with boilers, radiators, ventilation system, etc., but not really in an efficient way. And we didn't really look at the fabric at all, or not very much. So on the 21st century is what we need to tackle is passive measures. So it's the fabric of the building that will enable you to reduce this energy demand to 50 kilowatt hour per meter square per year, and then you can electrify that heat production. So this is a really key finding. How you know it works, you can use thermal imaging camera, and I love this image from Justin Baer's architect's office, where he's insulated externally a house, and this is a thermal imaging showing how leaky the next door buildings are in comparison to the one that he's retrofitted. There is 6 key principles for a good retrofit, and Bob and Edith will go, and James will go into more details on this. I'm not going to describe them all, but there is insulation, windows, ventilation, air tightness, thermal bridging is the kind of 5 key principles of passive house approach. But for a retrofit, you must absolutely look at moisture as well, just to make sure that you don't have any unintended consequences when you implement the retrofit. This is the graphic that is used mostly for passive house representation of these 5 key principles, with the addition of moisture here. I'm the author of this publication, which was published in 2013. So 20 case studies of retrofits, which was based on the Retrofit for the Future program, which was a government program at the time. So I looked in details at 20 case studies of pre-1919 and post-1919 to try to give people a range of projects and examples to inspire people. This is now going to be re-edited because it's sold out and we're going to add some more new case studies. Hopefully it'll be done this year. This is the LETI Climate Emergency Retrofit Guide, which I mentioned earlier, which is really a key resource. And that's it for me. So I'm going to hand you over to Edith.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. What I thought it would be a really nice flow of this conversation is if we went to from the current context in the UK to some more design-focused elements, especially around managing moisture in buildings. So I work for the Useful Simple Trust, which is a multidisciplinary company that includes engineers, energy consultants, sustainability consultants, architects, and I've been specialized in large-scale domestic retrofit for the last 9 years. I'm an architect, retrofit coordinator, sustainability consultant. So what we're going to talk about today is starting from the context that Marion was very nicely introducing. We'll talk about what the main targets of which kind of buildings we are more likely to encounter when we undertake retrofit, especially large scale, and how are we able to see the possible causes of moisture problems, how we can diagnose them, and what can we do about it. I put a lot of references in the end with the view that you will be able to take this presentation as a PDF and you'll be able to get further reading on this as well. So in terms of the context that Marion already set it up, I think in this presentation we will focus on what is the most likely type of building that we will encounter, and mostly we are talking low-rise and up to 1940s, 1950s, because that constitutes quite a big part of the housing stock in the UK at the moment. And bearing in mind that the UK has the oldest housing stock in Europe. So we need to really be careful on how to introduce new elements to existing homes, and this is kind of the principle of we have traditional construction that is usually vapor permeable, that is usually well ventilated, that has gaps, and has got a whole different system in terms of ventilation and structure. And in modern times, we actually build very airtight buildings with controlled ventilation, we control moisture, we put barriers for vapor, etc. But when we do retrofit, what we are doing is actually overlapping some of these modern principles into an existing building that was functioning completely differently. So this is quite what can lead to potential problems in terms of moisture. Having been in this field for a while, I can recommend the two big references where you want to learn more about retrofit and moisture are going to be the Retrofit Academy, of course, and we got taught in their course about it in quite a lot of detail. And the other organization to be aware of is the UK Centre for Moisture in Buildings. There is a research center based at UCL, and is specifically developing guidance and working on moisture in buildings. So why is this essential? Why is this so important? And it's raising more and more in the public awareness. There's been that case of this child who died and is a couple of years ago, and his death has been directly related from mold issues in his house. And although probably not the first one and not the last one, it kind of rose a lot of awareness on this field. So there's been quite a lot of government-funded research about what's the situation, especially in social housing, on damp and mold. So a big driver for this is health and well-being for especially vulnerable residents and social housing. This report from the UK Centre for Moisture in Buildings will show that basically damp and mold are correlated with evidence to a number of illnesses and respiratory symptoms, increasing virus issues, and all sorts of worsening of asthma and other pathologies. So this is also why this is so important. And of course, sometimes landlords and householders put the blame on each other, but what we really need is for the landlords to do their part, but also to enable homeowners to use the strategies at home as related to moisture, especially in bathrooms, in kitchens, in the way they dry clothes and they use the building. So both are part of solving the problem. So how do we diagnose these problems when we go, for example, on a survey just before retrofit? The causes are going to be pretty much always in these four categories. There is going to be an internal buildup of moisture that is from people's breathing, metabolism, and pets, and all of that, or cooking, showering, all that kind of builds moisture internally. And this might lead to condensation if there's not enough ventilation. Rising damp is damp that comes from the ground, and you can see by capillary action coming through the walls. Rainwater penetration, when you have your roof leak and stuff like that. And services can sometimes leak as well. So this is just an idea of what contributes to internal production of moisture. And you might be surprised that some of these things are actually very impactful. For example, breathing. So if you have 10 people living in a house, or you have one in the same house, it's going to make a lot of difference, isn't it? So what happens when there is a lot of moisture that can't escape? It will go to the coldest surface in the building and start to condensate, reach dew point, and become water. And usually this happens where there are thermal bridges, so around windows, around junctions, and wherever the temperature is lower. So rising damp is identifiable because it would come from the ground up, and you might find that sometimes there is a damp-proof course in properties, kind of 20 centimeters from the ground, and that actually stops this capillary action to go further. This is an example of a damp-proof course in that picture with the masonry wall. For leak and rainwater penetration, how do you recognize them? This is going to be a lot more water-based. This is going to be maybe not in the external wall, but it's going to be maybe internally. It's going to form a patch, and it's going to be liquid, basically liquid water. It's not just going to be vapor. So this, you might see some swelling of the rendering, and you might see there are really wet patches. So when we add retrofit measures, then we need to be extra aware that a damp structure is actually going to also be less energy efficient, because if you have a wet coat, you're going to be colder than if you have a dry coat, first of all. And anything to do with retrofit needs to be first checked for damp and structural remediation. So you might need to remediate that first, let the structure dry, and then you'll be able to install your retrofit measures. An example in external wall insulation could be sometimes the installations just avoid certain parts of the building, certain elements like downpipes, and another reveals another part that maybe are not convenient to cut for contractors. And what happens there? There is a thermal bridge, a cold bridge, that probably internally will enable that condensation to occur internally, and you might see some black patches of mold growing like in that image. Another thing that can happen is if there is not a damp-proof course, if there are gaps in it, then that capillary action produces more dampness to come up. This is an example of a verge trim over external wall insulation where there are gaps, and of course rain can penetrate and making the insulation and the wall wet. Internal wall insulation, obviously this is a bathroom that I surveyed, and there are gaps in the insulation, and what it means that in a room that is going to be very full of vapor, these gaps will help the moisture to go through and behind the wall and create dampness in the wall and potential mold. When putting loft insulation, we need to make sure that the loft is well ventilated, because otherwise you might have a build-up of moisture within the loft, and then insulation can get wet, and all the benefits are going to be lost. The example of the underfloor insulation, again, you need good ventilation beneath. You usually find that there are air bricks under the DPC level, and this will help keeping insulation dry. Usually people put insulation underneath the floorboards, and then they put some boarding on top. So in conclusion, basically there are very many strategies on how to deal with single retrofit measures, but something to keep in mind are these principles. That first, you need to do any remediation of damp before you actually go to start your retrofit work. You took an integrated design. You might have seen the STBA wheel before, retrofit wheel, where you put, I think I put cavity wall insulation in here, and it tells you how many other systems in the house it will affect, that just one measure. Focusing on each retrofit measure, and as I went through some example, understand where there could be potential weak points. Continuing insulation to make all these junctions able to stop forming those cold bridges, and of course adding ventilation if you're making the house more airtight by, for example, more insulation or more airtightness. So I've put 2 pages of references for you in case you want to have a look at the PDF. There is a lot more reading in here that you can do. So I hope I kept a good timing, and thank you very much for your attention.
Nice one. Hi there. My name's Bob. I'm another architect, and I've been working on retrofit projects for probably the last best part of 20 years. I'm going to talk to you today about a one-off project, and thanks very much, Edith, for the great summary of sort of the importance of assessment and understanding buildings. I'm going to jump straight into kind of the design aspect on this project. These projects, by the way, are sort of a range of work that we've completed in the past. The grey numbers underneath represent the original space heat demand of these properties, so they're all in their sort of hundreds. And the darker numbers represent where we think the projects ended up. So that's sort of a range of sort of archetypes and different sorts of projects. Today I'm mainly going to talk about these 4 themes. So before we do anything to your house, have a plan. I'll talk a bit about how things go together at a detail level. I'll also talk about the importance of managing things on site and keeping track of things and keeping design going through that process. I'll say a little bit about commissioning because it's often forgotten in most projects. There's such a rush at the end to hand things over. And similarly, there's not much done on monitoring evaluation historically, and we're sort of especially keen to do more and more of that, because if you learn what went well and what went not so well, you're much better armed for future work. So this is a project we did about 20 years ago actually, but it's sort of a favourite of mine in terms of kind of one image which tries to describe what the whole house plan was. So there's an orange line which wanders around the external envelope and represents sort of insulation and air tightness layer. That was quite an easy line to draw, actually quite a hard line to execute. The detailing to make that orange line completely continuous is quite a challenge. There's also a ventilation system in there. There's much better windows. There's a heating system, and there's a little bit of renewable energy on that one too. The project I'm going to talk more about today is this one. This is a more recent project. It's a Victorian Mews house. And there are a few key points going clockwise around that section. The wall insulation bottom left, which is a plastered on wall insulation. I'll say a little bit more about that later. And then a very high performance window which replicates a Georgian sash very, very closely, but performs more like a triple glazed window, even though the glass is only 6mm thick. Solar shading too in the upper windows. So in London and the rest of the UK, increasingly we're going to experience overheating problems in the future. So managing solar gains really terribly important. This house is one of the first few projects we fitted air source heat pumps to, so low carbon heat, as Marion was explaining. Finding a place for that bit of kit is often a challenge. There's also a ventilation unit with heat recovery, top right, and going down the side there's an image of some underfloor heating, and also I think of a drying cupboard, a place to dry clothes and manage that moisture effectively. Before we did anything, we measured the energy consumption and broke that down into heating, hot water and so on. That's the graph on the left. We also looked at EPCs, compared those, and we did our own passive house model and sort of calibrated that with the build data that we had. And by deploying the measures I've described, the insulation, the good windows, the air tightness, the ventilation, the heat recovery, we were able to make a massive inroad into space heat demand and reduce that energy, that heating demand as on this graph. There was also quite a lot of architectural stuff which went with this retrofit, so quite often retrofits go alongside an extension or a conversion or something, and that was true in this case, but I'm not going to talk so much about that stuff today. This is a comparison we did at the start of this project, so it's a solid wall Victorian house. We looked at different types of insulation and the sort of U value we could obtain with different thicknesses of different sorts of insulation. And the one highlighted with the red box is the one we went with, so it had very little impact on square meterage of floor area, relatively thin. It's a moisture open material, so it's completely breathable, helps manage moisture in the building quite effectively in the way that Edith described. It didn't get us an amazing U value, but the U value was good enough in association with the other measures, the wider whole house plan, to reach those goals I described just now. So onto site, strip out time, and sort of finding out what's behind those walls. Not much behind the plasterboard, often bare brickwork in this one. On the roof, the new roof construction, highly insulated, super airtight. These dormers with quite fat cheeks for extra insulation, and quite thick heads too for the blind box that I described just now. A little bit of tanking on one wall, and also some moisture monitoring probes going in early on so that we could see later on how the wall was doing. Ventilation with heat recovery going in, underfloor heating going in. All of these things, which look quite simple, require quite a lot of time on site to make sure that the coordination we've done on the drawing materialises in reality. We also included some ventilation with cooling. So this site's in central London, and with urban heat island effect, and as we discovered last summer, we can get very high temperatures which last for several days. So this was used last summer. I'll describe this a bit later. This is the wall insulation going on. So a much messier process than the CAD drawing, and a contractor who was actually learning to apply this material on this project. So the day before, a lot of the insulation went on the wall and then fell straight off the wall until he got the mix just about right, and today was a good day. There's the insulation drying out and sort of things being fixed through it, in this case a stair. Up on the roof, the air source heat pump going in, and other bits of kit, other sort of clever roof lights and blinds and so on. And down below on the right hand side, that's the cupboard you need for the hot water tank and the associated pipework and controls for an air source heat pump run heating system. I'm not going to show much on kind of the architecture, but the left hand side is one of the before shots, and on the right hand side the after. Commissioning. So some things are easy to commission, some things are harder. And we found the cooling was quite difficult to measure the airflow that we were getting out of the slot diffusers, which we designed to be almost invisible in the ceiling. And this is you might recognise one person in that photo. That's a rig which I ended up having to make bespoke in order to measure the airflow, but it was worth doing. And when you commission things, when you design things, you've got to think about this stage. This is part of a commissioning sheet which we use at the end of a project to check everything is indeed working. Some things are still red on there. The idea is that everything goes green before you hand the keys over. In terms of measured energy use in the end, so we've got the before stuff on the left, the after in the middle, that's the energy going into the house, which is pretty much as we expected, slightly better. But when we plug on the air source heat pump, that gives us consumption at the meter of the far right hand side. So you can see the heating and hot water demand has been reduced by about 90%. And that's still with a wall insulation which isn't spectacularly aggressive. All those are measured things after the project to confirm the house is doing as we planned. This one's a bit harder to read. This looks at temperature throughout the year. The yellow line is what's happening outside. So usually it's quite low. In the summer it gets higher than the indoor temperature. The indoor temperatures are the ones tightly grouped in the grey zone, so generally almost flat line, very comfortable internal environment. This is a plot of the short period we had last summer when there was the heat wave. So again, the yellow line is moving a lot, getting very high and sort of dipping down to sort of 20 at night. Again, the internal temperatures are staying well below 25, sort of between 20 and 25, and not varying very much at all. And that's really a result of being able to deploy the cooling system, which I've described. A little bit about RH too, so relative humidity. blue line quite high and sort of varying a lot outside. All the coloured lines below generally very flat and sort of between 40 and 60%. So very comfortable. In bathrooms, you see the occasional spikes. They go quite high, but they drop back immediately, and that's mainly driven by the ventilation unit, which is constantly extracting the warm, moist air from those spaces. That's a little comparison of embodied carbon, and I was quite pleased we spent most of the embodied carbon on the energy saving stuff here and not so much on the grey architecture stuff. I say that as an architect, but if we're going to do retrofit well, we've got to think how we spend that carbon. And that's a plot showing sort of before and after, so sort of over 60 years if you project forward. So the reddish lines are sort of what would happen if we'd not intervened. The green line is what the retrofit should deliver, so a massive reduction in overall carbon. So that's looking at operational and embodied together. In conclusion, the sort of few key lessons learned, or the things we could have done better, because I think it's important to focus on the things we could do better as well. So the air source heat pump, we got about 350% coefficient performance out of that, which for those people that know, that's quite good. But actually we could have got, I think, closer to 400 if I'd known what I know now about the underfloor heating system. And there are a couple of weak links we left in that, which I sort of regret. Could have done better. We've not fitted any renewables or any PV, and I think we should have been braver at planning. We were a bit scared at planning that we would get sort of hung up on a lot of conservation issues. I think the climate's shifted now and we could probably win that. And the commissioning of that cooling system was actually, as you probably gathered from the photo, not completely straightforward. So, thinking about systems and how they work in reality, very, very important. And that's this house was featured on House of the Year last year, so you can see more on Channel 4 if you fancy. And that's it for me. End gas now. Thank you.
Okay, hello, good afternoon. My name is James Traynor. I'm Managing Director at ECD Architects. And sadly, I'm another architect, so you are in a retrofit design session, so I'm afraid that's just to be expected. But we obviously have discussed prior to coming today how we could cover all of the topics around retrofit design, and I think all the previous speakers have really focused, well, I suppose Marion set the scene, and then Bob and Edith have really drilled into the specific issues in terms of ventilation, moisture, and delivery on site. What I'm going to talk about is doing it at scale, so taking one property and then learning that lesson multiple times. And I think as a practice is something we've been doing, like many of the speakers, for many years. So the first project we did was 2008, a deep retrofit for Hyde, but many projects since then, and I think, as we all know, this is very much a growing sector because it needs to grow. Our country is really relying on the growth of retrofit. So I'm going to talk about set the scene really, and then talk a little bit about funding. So funding for social housing, that really is the focus of my talk, because certainly the scale of retrofit that we're seeing in the social housing sector is something that was perhaps, it was very, very much needed, but it's something that certainly wasn't the case 5 years ago. How we obtain that funding and how we identify eligible projects and help our clients achieve that funding so that they can efficiently deliver it. The importance of archetypes, so obviously identifying, I think Edith showed us a slide which from DRE, the many archetypes in the English Housing Survey, but there are many more. In reality, as you get on site, you find that the differences become extremely important, and that's really, really important when you are trying to deliver projects efficiently at scale. The outputs from the Retrofit Designer, how they relate to PAS 2035, some lessons learned, and then delivering on site. So, where am I pointing at? Oh, sorry, too far. There we go. Just to say, ECD is energy conscious design, and we do retrofit, but we also do many other things as well. So the images on the left-hand side there are retrofit projects, large buildings, smaller buildings, and the images on the right are new build passive house projects. We also are passive house designers, like many of the speakers today, and big advocates of that. For providing a really good understanding of how buildings really perform. So, retrofit at scale, what does that look like? And these are just some images from the last couple of years of projects that we've been involved in, a variety of different types, and the kind of drawings that we are producing. But first, just to talk about funding. And the SHDF, or Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which many of you in the audience will be aware of. There have been now, we're in the second wave, which should be announced hopefully in the next few days, maybe next week, I've heard, but we'll see. But we've been involved in the very first phase, what's called Demonstrator, and then Wave 1, and have been involved in about 10,000 properties so far nationally. Some of them in Scotland, which is a different programme, but overall around about that sort of number. When you come to apply for that funding to BAES, or whatever the department is now called, it's important that you identify the right properties. And I think I also speak on behalf of the Social Housing and Retrofit Accelerator, which is if you're not familiar with that, it's a really useful platform which is designed to help clients and industry gear up to deliver the retrofit of housing. And there's various masterclasses, and many of the speakers are here and in other places that are contributors to that. So I think what this pathway essentially shows is that you might start with a very long list of properties, maybe several thousand properties that are in theory eligible. They might be band E, F and G properties, EPC, EF and G, but actually turning that into a real project that you can deliver that's efficiently, not just design but deliver on site, is a challenge, and making sure that the bid that you put together is considered, and that you've really understood the archetypes that you're dealing with, the properties that you're, because you often have a very narrow window in which to bid. So identifying those properties efficiently and quickly, understanding their real performance, not relying on their EPC, and then coming up with sensible measures, understanding what those benchmark costs might be, and then putting together a funding bid, is all within a 2-month window. Can be quite challenging. So some clients are very much ready for this, some not so, and have required a lot of hand-holding, and that's absolutely fine. Nobody's expecting the industry to be expert on day one, but we're all getting better and we're all learning. And in fact, it's a real lesson for me that what we're showing now will be very different to what I might show in 2 or 3 years' time, because we're discovering efficiencies all the way along the process. Because there are obviously many millions of properties to retrofit, and we have to identify those archetypes. We have to understand how they really perform, so that we can standardize the packages of information. And so that little graph on the top right just shows the yellow line is what we call a cover sheet, essentially something that is unique to that property, and it's inherent in the PAS 2035 process, that the retrofit has to be specific to that property, not a generic solution. And that's something that's absolutely crucial, even when you're delivering 10,000 homes. But there will be something that's similar to the property down the street, and it's identifying the similarities and making sure you deliver them efficiently that's really, really important. So the blue line is the GA drawings, so the plans, the sections, the elevations, and they will be similar across some properties. And then the green line is the details. So you could say this applies to nationally. We will ultimately end up with a situation where we have retrofit details for every single property type. We're not there yet. We're still some way off, but we're getting there. But every single property will require a unique cover sheet. So this is a project that we've currently got on site in Milton Keynes. This is very interesting architecturally because it's the very first phase of Milton Keynes' new town development, the Netherfield estate, which is a very interesting exhibition called Every House on Langland Road, which is about 4 or 5 years ago now, which really sort of talks about the social history as much as anything of the estate. But you can see on the right-hand side a plan of the estate, very orthogonal, modernist estate, and on the left-hand side you can see the images of the different types. And all of those properties are the same archetype because structurally they're all timber frame. And that helps us enormously because fundamentally a lot of the details will be similar. We identify an archetype by its construction. We also identify the sub-archetype. Is it a mid-floor property or an end terrace or 2-bed or detached, whatever that specific location is, because that will have an important aspect or important impact on the performance of that property. And as was said earlier, a bungalow will perform far worse with the same specification than a flatted property with the same retrofit solution, like for like. So the form factor, the positioning of that property, the orientation of it, all very, very important. And then finally the variant. Has that property been modified since it was originally built? This is particularly important in the private sector, but also in the public sector. Has there been an attic conversion? Has there been a conservatory? Has there been a porch? Multiple things that could have been done differently to that property, which will affect the performance. So understanding those are absolutely crucial, and identifying them at an early stage and building that into your funding is really important. I'm just quickly I won't dwell on these very long on these next few slides because these are just the outputs from the type of projects that we've been doing. I think this is going to be shared, these presentations, but you feel free to take pictures. But this is a cover sheet which is unique to that particular property. It identifies all of the specific details that are relevant and the retrofit designer's role in the process on the right-hand side. And identifies the location of the property as well. This is a general arrangement for a particular archetype, so this archetype and also a sub-archetype because it's a sort of corner block, but it will apply to other properties, and in fact you can see on the page there we've got I think about a dozen properties that are similar to that property, so that this elevation applies to these properties as well. I think this one was in Crawley, but you can see the measures and referencing the various details that need to come off it. Same with elevations, and then the details, and then obviously the details, like any architectural detail, keyed off the plans and identified in the specification, which is there. So that's the sort of pack that you would have for a property. You'd have a cover sheet, the relevant elevation sections, plans, and the relevant details. It might be some properties have 5, 6 details, usually not less than 5 or 6. Some might have 20, depending on the complexity. At scale, I think it's very important to say, I know the session isn't fundamentally about engagement, but it's really, really important to talk about that because every property and every project is unique and every group of residents are unique, and understanding the starting point is absolutely crucial. How does the landlord want to interact with the residents? This project will make a massive difference to the residents who live there, both eventually in terms of the benefit of the reduced energy bills and savings and improved thermal comfort. But during the works, there's no getting away from it. It will have a huge impact on them. Even if the works are done externally, it's really important that we engage with residents and ensure that they buy into the process and really understand what's being proposed and can have a say in that as well. And then, as Bob talked about earlier, really important that we talk about the post-completion, having a simple user guide for the resident, how to use their energy efficient home, and having that feedback loop and commissioning. So lessons learned, I think for us, alignment with funding is crucial. Some cases clients have come to us with a funding pot which doesn't really fit with what they want to do. So ideally, if we're involved at the start, that's great. We can help shape that. But if not, then trying to make that work. Obviously, past 2035 in alignment is crucial as well. Getting a good understanding of the dwellings, the benchmarks, clarity, and above all, a realistic programme. I think Bays has learnt in the last couple of years that some of the programmes for the first wave of funding were probably not realistic, but and hopefully over the next 2 years, 3 years, we've got more realistic timeframes. And planning is very inconsistent. So we've got projects where the same measures are treated as don't require a planning application, others that do. And having a very close working relationship with your assessors and coordinators is really, really important. So we have in-house assessors and coordinators, but whoever they are, it's really important to work really, really closely with them as designers. And then just some pictures of some various projects on site showing lots and lots of issues that are being resolved. So building out the verge detail to receive the insulation, bringing the windows forward beyond the line of the wall so that they in the insulated zone. All these things are not what we were doing as an industry 5 years ago, and everything needs to change. And this process is really getting us there. But we're finding cans of worms along the way. So I'm not sure if it's in those pictures, but one of our projects was insulated cavities. The holes had been drilled, they'd also been filled, but the holes had been filled, but the cavities had never been filled. So there was something fraudulent going on 10, 15 years ago when work was done. And we only found out because when we took the windows out, there was no insulation there. So I suppose a bit like Grenfell, we will find some cans of worms in the process. And that's it from me, I think.
Thank you, everyone. Apologies that I've let them overrun a bit, but they were such informative presentations. I hope you'll agree. I think it was worth it. But we've only got about 6 minutes for questions from the floor. But who would like to start? Got any questions? One by the just ahead there. Yeah.
To Rob, generally, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting, all of you. What internal wall insulation did you use, and what U value do you actually achieve?
The generic sort of product is an insulating plaster, and I don't think I describe it. It's the one with cork in it, as well. It's also aerated, and so 2 inches of that we thought got us around about 0.54 or something, so not spectacularly low. But because we were able to work quite hard on the windows and on the roof and on the floor, I mean, we were very airtight, that didn't sort of disable the project. It's still almost 4 times better than where we started. So, that's still a good place to be.
I'm thinking about the economics of retrofit. A lot of deep retrofit has often got astronomical payback periods. Obviously, they're less now with the fuel price hikes. But I've heard in excess of 100 years for some deep retrofits, which is possibly why the Treasury isn't very supportive of us. And particularly when you come to the private sector, how on earth do we deal with that?
Who would like to tackle that?
I'll start, and my colleagues can carry on. So I think certainly things have improved as energy prices have become more realistic, in my view. Yeah. You know, it just swung things enormously. But we're still talking about tens of thousands of pounds. But my take is with private homeowners. I mean, some people they might be asset rich and cash poor, but there's quite a lot of people in our society who have both, actually. And so I think the first people doing retrofit generally the more wealthy, and I think the more people that do it, and the more we've got a supply chain geared up through that process, we will see costs become more reasonable over time. But for now, yeah, it's still quite a harsh thing. But, you know, if it takes 20 years to pay the money back, you've got 20 years of comfort in your home. That, for me, is worth a lot of money.
Yes, and I would just like to add also that we're going to have to decarbonise our homes no matter what. So I think the payback is not necessarily the good metrics to use. You know, the boilers are going to phase out. We're not going to be able to buy any new boilers past a certain date. So this is not going to be optional in the future. So it's really about how we do it, how efficiently do it. You know, how efficient can you do it, and how we can upskill the supply chain and bring, you know, train more people. And the Retrofit Academy is doing a fantastic job. But, you know, this should be, you know, 100 times bigger in terms of number of people they need to train around the country. So I think it's more, the question is more around that as opposed to payback.
I'll just add one small point, really. It's also when you do it as well, and how you align it with something you might want to do anyway. Yep. So you might want to do an extension, you might want to do a conversion. So you're getting other benefits, like the presentation that Bob gave. It wasn't just about retrofit. So it was, you know, doing something else and making sure you get that efficiency.
Yeah. And there's all sorts of other home improvements people do without even thinking about a payback. There just isn't one. So, you know, it's not the whole picture, is it? Any more questions? 2 minutes. If there's anything else. We have one here. Sorry, it's a long way for you to walk.
Hello. Maybe you can say a few words about details between a retrofitted property that is next to a not retrofitted property, flats, for example.
So flatted blocks, multi-story flats, I think really multi-story flats, I don't think we've ever done a block for an individual property within a block. I'd have grave reservations about doing that, frankly. Certainly, obviously, it could only be done internally if you were doing that, and it's not to say it's impossible, but I think our preference would be to do it externally and to work with the landlord, the freeholder, to do the entire block if you were doing a multi-story block. On street properties, obviously you have the party walls, and that thermal bridging calculation has to be done at every junction, because the neighbouring property may not want to be insulated, may not be part of your program, or just isn't interested. So that has to be understood, but that's relatively simple. For flatted blocks, I don't know. It's probably better to do it in one go, because you have scaffolding costs as well, and all of that. It's much better to do it as a whole project.
Right. Well, our hour is up, so we better call it quits at that. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found it useful, and please let's. applause for the speakers again.